Greetings. My name is Treadwell. I am not able to make the class today, but I wanted to make sure that I still have the opportunity to present my top 10 sources in the form of books that I've been utilizing for my research. In my paper, I warranted these books as the most 10 foundational, the most essential books needed to research 19th century Florida public officials. The subject of my research was an individual by the name of Charles Pierce. Charles Pierce not only was a presiding elder in the AME Church, stemming from 1866 to 1879, but Pierce was also a U.S. Senator, a tax collector, school superintendent, and held other positions. So in order to understand these positions, to understand the world that he operated in, as well as to have a better understanding of some of the elements Pierce faced, I wanted to make sure that I had a true macro study so I could know what I'm getting myself into. The first book that I chose was History of the World Christian Movement. I don't know if it's easy for you to see. This is the first and the only World Christian Movement book wrote. That might seem somewhat strange because world Christian history is a popular subject. But the focus of this book is to study the interconnectedness between Christianity regardless of location, place, date, or time. So at one particular moment, this book will study Christianity in Asia, Africa, as well as Europe, and study some of the interconnected traditions that are being embodied. This book focuses on early Christianity to 1453, but it was a great foundational study in terms of understanding how interconnectedness works within the faith. The next book that I chose was The Religious History of America. This obviously is a solid foundation in terms of understanding each and every religious movement that happened in America, starting from colonial times all the way up to current society. It gives you a good understanding of where your denomination or affiliation, or in terms of myself, where my subject matter came into what was happening preceding his entrance into Florida. The next book that I used was The Methodist Experience in America. This is the only historical resource that can be used for Methodist studies. It embodies every single Methodist movement event that happened in Florida, catalogs it in a very efficient manner, and the writing behind the movements flows very well, and it's a great source that I was able to understand some of the key themes behind Methodism. One of the drawbacks from this book is that it was written by a Methodist Episcopal Church scholar, which now would be considered the United Methodist Church, and it's also utilized in the United Methodist Church scholarship. But those things shouldn't hold back the great scholarship within this book, because obviously the AME Church, what my individual was affiliated with, through a schism, stemmed outside from the Methodist Episcopal United Methodist Church. So it is still useful in guiding information that helps me to understand the earliest times of the movement and how it still correlates with its brother in Methodism. The next book that I used, African American Religion, was a extremely resourceful book. One of the things that was amazing with this book is that it is the only anthropological book focusing on African American religions. It takes a lot of socioeconomic situations, different demographics, and compares different African American spiritual practices, different faiths, different denominations against one another, and tries to look for any positive or negative correlations. Where people live, do they worship a particular way? where people stand financially. Does that put them in a specific denomination? That information, although contemporary, was extremely important for my study because, as was argued in world Christian movement, Christianity is interconnected regardless of time or space. So the same movements that are embodied within the contemporary society are also prevalent in the earliest forms of Christianity. Moving into that, my next book was There Is a River. There Is a River, written by Vincent Harding, is an amazing book that catalogs the oppression that African Americans had to face from slavery all the way to the Reconstruction time period. And one of the reasons I selected this book was not only for its emphatic writing and its broad sources that it provided in terms of slave experience, but it also gave me somewhat of an outlook of what Pierce's life would have been and some of the elements that Pierce would have had to face. Even though it obviously did not speak on Pierce, it gave me a good mindset in terms of the setting in which I would be writing in. Our next book was written by W.B. Du Bois, The Souls of Black Folk. And this is one of the most, if not one of the most credited black publishings ever released. But the reason why I found it an intricate part of my study is because of A, the dual consciousness that Du Bois speaks on, and two, the spiritual embodiment of black people. And one of the things that I pulled from this book is that Du Bois felt that black people would not be able to fully express themselves if they were continually stuck in an oppressive culture. And I felt like one of the things that black people had to do, especially the AME Church, instead of succumbing to accommodationalism, they had to find ways where they can truly liberate themselves and create their own voice. But this kind of antithesis of my character, Pierce's study, was pretty much seeing what the other side believed and kind of understanding what kind of criticism that Pierce had to deal with. My next book, African Americans in the Reconstruction of Florida, 1865 through 1877, written by Joe Richardson, is the first publishing that focuses on the Reconstruction movement in Florida. I felt this was extremely important and needed to be inserted into my study because basically, although I lived in Florida for a while, my understanding of African Americans' participation during the Reconstruction is minimal to none. The opportunity for me to do a true background research on this time would have taken years. So this truly cataloged all the information I need, put it in a linear book, and it was extremely resourceful. The next book that I did was Florida Black Public Officials, from 1867 to 1924, written by Cantor Brown Jr. This is somewhat similar to Richardson's book. I want to say that Brown was inspired by Richardson, but one of the interesting things is Brown obviously focuses only on Florida black public officials. This is useful because Pierce was an official, like I had stated before, and this gives me all the background knowledge in terms of the individuals that he would have ran against, individuals that he would have shared community with in terms of conversation, debate, political teams. And this just gives me a good sense of the community and the individuals that he was surrounded with and the type of mentality that they shared to see if there was any correlation between the two. Second to last, the book that I chose was For a Great and Grand Purpose, the beginning of the AME Church in Florida. And this book was also written by Cantor Brown Jr. and Larry Rivers. One of the great things about this book, and in my paper said it was the most important source that I used that was secondary. And one of the things that I enjoyed about this book was that it gave me not only the political background and the agricultural and the educational and the economical background of all the AME ventures in Florida, but it also stemmed outside in terms of the relationship that the AME Church was having with Baptist members, Catholic members, outside individuals of the church. This truly put together 10 years of research into a pleasant read for me. It gave me a ton of bridges in which I can connect to primary sources, and it truly elevated my ability to do fine research. Finally, and I don't have the book in hand because it was written in 1888, is The History of the AME Church by Daniel Payne, also known as Bishop Daniel Payne of the AME Church. One of the things about the history of the AME Church is that there is no official history book as like the United Methodist Church had, besides Payne's book. So even though this book is over 100 years old, it's still the sole AME history book published. It's an amazing book. It's over 400 pages of history stemming from 1816 to 1880. It gives us information, most of it coming from minutes during conferences. So Bishop Payne thought it was important that we knew who was elected, when it was elected, what church was founded, what time they sent out deacons and laymen to churches. It's so much basic information. Some people might see as kind of redundant, but it's important to see how active and how excited particular regions kind of grab the church. So these 10 books I felt were the most fundamentally sound as well as the most important when doing research on 19th century Florida politicians and the black church movement at this period of time. I will continue to sound out and fine-tune my research, but as I do so, I will utilize all these secondary sources as my sole foundation and the footing in which I stand under. Thank you very much.